Good evening, everybody. I am calling to order a meeting of the Human Affairs Committee at 7:22 p.m. Monday, August 21st in the Aldermanic Chamber. Please call the roll.
Sure. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
I am here. I am recovering for surgery and I can hear everyone.
Alderman Patricia Klee, I am here. Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr. And Alderwoman at Large Gloria Timmons.
Here.
And Chairman Alderman Thomas Lopez.
I am here.
We have quorum. We have 4 present. Also in attendance is Julian Long, Heidi Peak Kukluka. No, so sorry. Please we'll correct for the record. Nelson Ortega, Jennifer McCormick, and Mark Cooley. Sorry about that, for the fire department, yeah.
All right, great. We'll begin by anyone wishing to make public comment on issues that are relevant to our agenda. Seeing no members of the public, our first item on our agenda is a discussion, including environmental health and code enforcement. If you'd like to come up and have a seat.
Sir, there's a public hearing. We have to do the
We
public
just had
hearing.
the public hearing.
Yeah, but she's got it on the agenda as a public hearing, but.
Oh, hold on, is this a second public hearing? Because there were 2 different.
Yes, sir. Yeah, this is for the annual action block.
Yep, okay, thank you for the correction. For the public's knowledge, we just had a special Board of Aldermen with a public hearing on the Library Plaza, and there's another public hearing, so I skipped over because I thought it was a duplicate. That was my mistake, and I'm glad you called attention because we don't want to skip a public hearing. So the first order of our business is a public hearing on FY 2024 Annual Action Plan Development for the City of Nashua's Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, and Home Investment Partnerships Program, HOME. So, any members of the public wishing to make testimony in favor, please approach the mic.
Do you need Mr. Long to?
Actually, Mr. Long, would you like to make an initial presentation? Because I'm out of order, I kind of ruin my tradition typically, but when we do the public, this is also a fly, will not leave me alone here. We typically have a presentation just to kind of provide context, and then we do the testimony.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is in regards to the proposed substantial amendment to the FY 2024 action plan for the CDBG and home programs. This amendment is really just to bring forward prior year projects that we were always intending to continue into the current program year, and those projects are the Pine Street pedestrian crossing project from last year, the Ash Street Futsal Court lighting project from FY 2022, and the Los Amigos Playground renovations project from FY 2022.
Okay. Any clarifying questions from the board? Okay. Manager Long, just a quick question. Sorry, I don't want to wait for you to leave, but I remembered the futsal court and lighting, and I remembered the Your Choice, Your Voice. I did not remember the outcome of the pedestrian crossing. That was approved as part of our HUD plan for last year?
Yes, sir. That was approved as part of the plan for last year. And all 3 projects we are hoping to see completion this fall.
Okay. And there isn't any additional funds being requested? We're just amending the plan?
No, sir. These are all prior year funds that we're just bringing forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarifying. Now we'll be taking testimony in favor. Seeing none. Any testimony in opposition to amending the HUD plan? Seeing none, we will again take testimony in favor. And again, we will take testimony in opposition. As there appears to be no testimony, public testimony, I will close the public hearing at 7:26 p.m. Now we have our regular meeting. We have public comment as our first agenda item. Do not see any members of the public here to step forward. So we can move to discussion and invite environmental health and code enforcement up to participate in the discussion. Yeah, you're welcome to sit up here, but I just wanted to ask Fire if you're here for that discussion as well.
No, we're just here for the one resolution for 139, which is a grant acceptance.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so if you guys want to pick a seat, get comfortable.
And Heidi, if you could pronounce your name properly, I apologize. I knew you originally as Heidi Peak, and
Yep.
and you go and get married and change your name. And
That's a long story. Yeah. Heidi Peak Kokoka.
Kokoka, thank you.
Thank you.
So some background, the Human Affairs Committee has absorbed what was historically the Substandard Living Conditions Committee. That committee was started years ago when a number of media exposés on local housing support programs, motels and that kind of stuff, were kind of exposed for having a number of challenges for the people that were living there. And the city's response was pretty effective. I think we created legislation that gave code enforcement a little bit more ability to intervene when we have actors that aren't necessarily as motivated to fix things or manage their facilities as we would like, without necessarily becoming obtrusive or interfering with anything. So the committee did good work. It persisted for a couple more years and became a vehicle for the public to talk about different experiences that they were having, and for us to educate the public as to what the city departments do respectively to maintain the quality of living here in Nashua. So last month at our Human Affairs Committee, we had 603 legal and New Hampshire legal assistants talking about tenant rights. And so this month I invited Heidi and Nelson to come and present on what their departments do to help maintain housing quality, and then what kind of resources are available, kind of the right doors to go through for people who have concerns. So I'm not sure which one you'd like to start. Maybe Nelson?
Yeah, I can start. Nelson Ortega, Code Enforcement Manager for the City of Nashua. Basically, our department right now consists of myself as the manager and what I call 2.5 code officers. We still have an open position, so we're trying to fill. But basically, our responsibility is to enforce any of the Nashua Housing Code within the Nashua Housing Code that we have. And I say within Nashua Housing Code because other communities have their own type of ordinances, and some of them that don't have code enforcement departments follow the state standard of housing code. Nashua follows the Nashua NROs. Basically, the way we function is, though we attempt to be proactive when we can, especially now with shorthanded that we are, the majority of our department is reactive with complaints. Since COVID, our numbers and the types of complaints we've gotten are a little different. We seem to get a lot of more neighbor complaints about each other than we have been getting tenant complaints, though it looks like they're starting to go up now at the time of season. But a resident who's a tenant in the city of Nashua they have an ordinance that they need to follow before they file a complaint with code enforcement. And they call us and we explain it to them. This is an ordinance that was passed years ago by Alderman Clemens when he was here, was any tenant that's gonna file a complaint in Nashua must first give the landlord written notice, and 14 days notice, and allow them 14 days to address their issue. We tell them it's supposed to be a registered certified letter. Most of the time we just tell them to just write the letter and give the landlord the original, they keep a copy and give us a copy. We then put that complaint into our system and we keep it there until we hear from the tenant on that 14th or in the 15th day. And the tenant will either respond, let us know that Nelson, we called and that we gave the landlord the notice, they haven't done anything. Once that 14 days met, then we have every authority to reach out to the owner and say, okay, what's going on? We have a copy of the letter. This is when you got it, allegedly got it. At that point, then we will then either schedule an inspection or just see what the plan that the landlord has to address that issue. The one thing we do is that when we do get a complaint, even though it's still within the 14 days, usually the next day, depending on what time we get it, we reach out to the owner anyway. And it's what we call a courtesy call. And we let them know that, hey, just so you know, a complaint has been made. Did you get a copy of the letter? Some landlords say yes, some will say no. If they don't, then we'll fax it or email it to them. so they can have it. Because a lot of landlords do want to address the problem because they don't want the stigma of code enforcement over them. So we'll send them, we'll give them a heads up, they got it, and some of them will address it. The 14th day comes, either it's all taken care of or they need an extension of a sort, depending on what it is that needs to be done. We then reach out to the tenant, or the tenant reaches out to us, and we say, okay, this is what's going on so far. Has there been any changes? Have there not? And then we go from there. It all depends on what the violation is. The only complaints that are exempted from the written notice is an emergency complaint. Ceiling collapses, no hot water, no water, something that's life needs to be addressed there. Then the tenant is just required to give the landlord reasonable time to respond. And by reasonable time is if the landlord is in Boston working or somewhere else, reasonable time, okay, well, 2 hours to get to where, from there to here, or to reach their property manager, or get a tradesman to address whatever that particular issue is. So other than that, that is how a tenant complaint starts off in code enforcement. Then once we do the inspection, we schedule a re-inspection for when everything is done. The landlord has to call us and say, yeah, I'm done with the list, or whatever the emergency is. And then we go out and we re-inspect. If they pass, they pass. And if they don't, we say, well, no, you need to take care of this. If we run into a landlord that is hesitant or causes issues, that's when we have to get into, well, you have these many days now to take care of it, or we will issue you a citation. We haven't had to issue too many of them, though we have issued them. But we haven't, on a yearly basis, if we issue 15 a year, that's probably a lot. And I'm probably using a high number, because most of the landlords do take care of them. But we do issue them if they have to. So that's the general gist of a housing code complaint, which is basically, I think, what we were looking at more today than neighbor complaints and other complaints.
So just to clarify, that's the process if somebody were going to make a complaint against a large tenant or landlord type of thing? Not, what about just, is there a 14-day waiting period for any tenant?
There's a 14-day requirement for every tenant.
Okay.
Yeah, and tenants also are not, they're one of the only few people who are not allowed to remain anonymous when they make a complaint.
Okay. Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ortega, just to clarify for the public, when we say tenant complaint, that means the tenant actually still has to be living there. If the tenant moved out and complained about what the living condition was there, you cannot go in and do anything. Is that correct? So they actually physically have to be living there. I ask this knowing the answer because I've had people call me and said, I just moved out, it was horrible, I want to put a complaint into the city. And I'm like, you needed to do it before you moved out. Yeah. So I just want the public to know that they have to be in resident, because the city cannot go in if there's no tenant there, correct?
Correct.
Or the tenant complaining is not living there.
Correct.
Thank you.
Just a real comment.
Sure.
Well, we do have people that call us and say, well, I'm moving. They'll go through the whole explanation and say, well, I'm moving out on Saturday. We still tell them, if you make the complaint while you're a resident, while you're still a tenant, and the complaint is made, we now still can follow through with that. But the complaint has to be made while they're still there. Even if they move out in 2 days, once the complaint is there, then the complaint stays.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you. That is good to know, because that might change some people's minds. I know some of the residents that I've spoken to feel that there would be retribution from certain, and I want to make it very publicly clear here that I think the majority of landlords are very good people and very caring and so on. There's just a few that are a few troublesome, so we're not trying to pick on that. If I may.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you. we're talking here tenants, and I heard you mention something about that you had an increase in residents, so neighbor to neighbor. That kind of call would be someone saying that the next door neighbor is not keeping their property, there could be critters or so on and so on. Do you do that for code enforcement as well?
Yes, it could be. We have jurisdiction over the exterior of any residence, not commercial properties or anything, but any residence, yeah.
Clarification?
Mm-hmm.
So that would mean if someone were keeping trash or, I refer to it as the residential landfill, or what about things such as overgrown grass? The truth is that we have a lot of people who have overgrown grass because they're doing pollinators, and some neighbors don't understand that. So you're not gonna be coming down on someone who just doesn't cut their lawn for pollination or whatever reason.
No, and the way the ordinance actually reads when it comes to overgrowth of vegetation is uncontrolled growth of vegetation. So if, we go by a property, someone calls and the grass is, 4 feet tall and it's just, you can't even see the front door, then we're gonna approach the home and say, what's going on, is there an issue? But if we go to a place and it looks like it's overgrown here and this side is, if it looks controlled, or like you're saying, someone pollinating something, once they explain it to us, we don't, we would let that be.
Thank you.
With regards to the 14-day notice, I just wanted a clarification. You'd said it, like, as an example, if someone was moving out in 2 or 3 days, then they could make a complaint while they're still a tenant. But you'd also said they can't make a complaint to your office until after a 14-day, after their landlord had been given 14 days notice? How does that usually navigate?
Yeah, no, they are required to give the landlord a written notice, allowing them 14 days to address the issue.
Okay.
If they give them a notice on a Monday and they leave on a Friday, the complaint has already been made, and the landlord has already been placed on notice. So even if the tenant calls us and says, we moved out, then we still have an open complaint there.
Okay, so it's not, if a member of the public says, my landlord just did this, that, and the other thing, I gave them written notice, I was making a complaint to you, you're not gonna just ignore it for 14 days, and that doesn't mean that, a landlord has 14 days to evict a tenant who would wanna complain. It means the tenant complains, advises, ideally, the tenant works with the landlord first. The tenant informs the landlord that they're going to make a complaint and that they're making the complaint. They make the complaint, but they still have to give the landlord 14 days before there's really any immediate issue.
Yes, they always have to give the landlord 14 days, whether the written complaint. But if a landlord decides, the only evictions we can get involved in are non-payment of rent, willful destruction of a property. Other than that, the landlord, if they decide to increase their rent, there was a time in my career here that I thought that landlords couldn't even increase your rent for 6 months, but went back and reread that particular ordinance, and they actually can still increase your rent. So for a long time, even I was under the impression that the landlord couldn't do that, but they can. But yeah, the 14 days are given. Whatever happens between the landlord and the tenant, if they work it out, a lot of tenants will say, they'll call and complain to us. We'll document it, and they'll say, but I don't want you to reach out to him yet, or don't contact him yet, because I want to see if I can work it out with him, or they're afraid of retaliation. When they say that they're afraid of retaliation, that's when we tell them, well, just so you know, for anything other than these issues, if the landlord attempts to evict you, you have to call us and let us know and tell us what does that eviction notice say, because that'll let us know if we can investigate it as retaliation because the complaint was made or not.
So your office takes a lot of information calls too, where people aren't sure whether they should complain or not, or whether this is a thing or not.
We log those in as questions and information and questions. And that goes in with the address and who the caller is, but we log it in that way. So at least we know that there's a record that this tenant did call in at some point.
I'm gonna call Alderman Timmons, but before we leave, can you make sure you describe what the qualifications are? Because if you're trying to hire somebody, maybe someone hearing this will be like, oh, I could do that. So Alderman Timmons, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Lopez. I do have a question. Several actually, but you clarified some of them, so thank you. One is you said you was down a position.
I'm sorry?
You were down one position, right?
Right, at the moment, we have one position.
How long have you been down for that?
It is now going on, I don't know, 17 months or something like that.
May I?
Alderman Timmons.
So, is it fair to say that that one position is not hindering you from doing your work since you don't really have that many complaints?
Oh no, the one position, the lack of that one position does hinder us because we can deal with a lot more complaints at one time. Right now, we'll get, each code officer, one code officer right now probably has 100 cases. Another one has 50. I myself have 51 open cases right now that I'm working on top of everything else that I do, because we're short that one person. The other code officer might have, one has 61 cases. So it just varies. But yeah, having that one position still vacant, it does hurt us.
Mayor? Okay, that one position, so I'm looking at an HR piece. Is it because you're not getting enough applicants? Why is that position, you're just not getting enough applicants?
Yeah, I think in this whole time period, I think I've gotten 8 applicants or 9. And out of the ones that would have been qualified, they couldn't take it because they were already either retired from within the system, and they can't work over a certain number of hours for a municipality. I think out of the 8 or 9, there probably were 4 that were qualified and 3 that I spoke to, and they couldn't take it.
And
yep.
I have one other question. In the event that you cannot get a liable candidate for that position, is it a possibility that you can put in for a part-time position until you're able to fill a full-time position?
Well, the way we're working is that the code officer who left the position is still helping us 15 hours a week until we fill the position. And then this is a position that's half paid by the city and half paid through the lead grant program. So at some point in time, I would need to meet with with Julian to see where we stand with that, because those are federal funds that also have to be applied for. So there's a lot in that little.
I'm sorry, Alderman Timmons.
Okay, thank you. This is about the retaliation piece. If a person make a complaint and he's been retaliated against in his mind, okay? You said it depends on why the landlord put in for eviction notice because he want them out for whatever reason. And do you have amount of days, or, let's say next month your rent go up or you get eviction notice?
Okay, I guess I didn't. Can you repeat the question? I guess
okay.
I must have missed something.
That's okay. When a tenant believe they've been retaliated against, is it a matter of weeks, months, or you have to have a specific letter saying why that particular landlord is evicting that person? I mean, I can see if it's because he didn't pay his rent, then of course. Yeah. But if it's something other than that, would you believe that's retaliation?
Anyone who files a complaint with code enforcement is kind of, they can't be retaliated against for 6 months from the date of retaliation, from the date of their complaint. But if in that 6-month period, if they're getting evicted for non-payment of rent or willful destruction of property, we can't do anything about that.
That's a different story.
But if they're getting complaint for like no reason, something that they have to call and say, Nelson or whoever the code officer is, we'll tell them, give us a copy of the eviction notice, and if it sounds like a just because, other than not renewing their lease because that's a civil contract between them, then we would look at it and say, okay, we will call the owner and say, you're evicting these people, why? because you know that there is an ordinance that says you cannot retaliate against a tenant in any way, just like there is an ordinance that says a tenant cannot retaliate against a landlord either. So it protects them both. So yeah, but they're covered for 6 months from the date of their first complaint to us, if they're getting evicted. So the retaliation is really evicted because we can't do anything about the owner increasing the rent.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
So I see Alderman Clee, but I just want to point out, and maybe offer a chance for Mr. Nelson to explain, for Nelson to explain. This code enforcement department it's not just a hammer. Like, there's a lot of tools and resources, particularly working with urban programs, that you might have to offer. And so where you're describing that when a landlord-tenant relationship is sort of breached because the tenant hasn't gotten any resolution within the dynamic that was agreed upon, and so they go to the third party, which is the city, and the city code enforcement comes in, does their thing, and sure, a landlord can raise the price, and I mean, the tenant can get evicted, he can file to have his eviction looked at, he can do any number of things to continue to perpetuate that negative dynamic. But before all of that happens, there is the opportunity kind of for code enforcement to get them working cooperatively. If the root of the problem is just maybe the landlord didn't understand the nature of a problem or didn't have the resources, the code enforcement isn't just coming and sticking a frowny face on something and then sending them a bill. You're giving them resources and education to try to mend that relationship.
Oh, absolutely. Citing a landlord or a tenant or going to the last resort of court or something, that is usually the last resort. There's a lot of conversation with tenants, landlords. We consider ourselves mediators also, because we will go to the home and we'll actually meet with both of them, and we'll have the tenant literally we'll tell them to show us and the landlord exactly what you're talking about. So there's no misunderstanding of what it is that's being said. And if it's something that the landlord maybe can't afford to do or is just too costly, then we'll try and connect that landlord with urban programs to see if there's anything that a property owner can do to work in getting those units up to par, whether it's the lead program or some other funding that they may have. We'll refer the tenants, for example, if they just have reached a point where they can't work with their landlord, then we say, well, now we'll refer them to either legal aid or we'll refer them to another source that might be able to help them more. But with tenants, it normally gets into the legalese of things, and that's when we have to let them know that unfortunately we can't give them the legal advice they're looking for, so we refer them to legal aid. And sometimes we may have a phone number of an attorney that we know deals with tenants and landlords, and we'll refer them to those resources. But yeah, there is a lot of back and forth before we get to a point of going after a landlord by citing him or taking them to court, yeah.
So in the greater context of the city's current struggles with larger than average populations of unsheltered people and an absolute unavailability of available rental stock, everybody takes it seriously and tries to prevent that eviction, whether it's the person who is doing code enforcement and trying to make sure that the place is safe and fair to live in, whether it's the landlord who's trying to make sure that they have a stable tenant that they know versus, rolling the dice on trying to get a new one in there, or it's the tenant themselves who are not particularly motivated to starting a fight that's going to end up with them searching for housing that may not be there.
Oh, absolutely. We'll have a tenant or a neighbor or someone will call us and say, hey, this apartment needs to be condemned, or this, most of the time it doesn't, but because we go in there, we'll look at it. But yeah, the first thing that we, in today's world, is we're just not gonna shut a unit down and say, if we shut a unit down in today's day, it's unsafe. Mm-hmm. And then we refer them, our first phone call is to Bob Mack, and let him know, hey,
welfare director.
Yeah, this person is coming your way. we'll provide them the information, and then Welfare Now knows that this person is probably going to come to them if they don't have another place to stay. So yes, we take having a landlord put anybody out or evict them, that is usually now one of the things we look at right away.
And just as a clarifying point, you're talking about rental properties where there's a tenant there. An individual with their home, you know, and their neighbor, as you pointed out, might be making complaints and everything, is extremely unlikely to have their own home, like, condemned or that type of thing.
We're talking specifically about tenants. Single-family homes, if they're rented, single-family homes, we have the same rules apply. If they're owner-occupied, the rules change. I have no jurisdiction over the interior of a single-family home, only the exterior of that home.
I just think it's important for families to know, because they might have an uncle or a grandfather or somebody that isn't able to take care of themselves, and they feel like there's this big nuclear option. All right, well, I'm going to report this to the city, and then that's not going to happen. So it's important to maintain that working relationship, whether it's with an individual that you might have a connection to, or whether it's a landlord and a tenant. That relationship and that agreement to work together to maintain housing is kind of where the focus is.
Yes.
Okay. Alderman Clee, you've been very patient.
No, you've been patient with me. Thank you so much. I have a couple of questions. I just want to make a clarifying statement first. I know Alderwoman Timmons had made a comment about that there weren't a lot of cases, but we do thousands and thousands of cases a year, correct?
Oh, yeah.
With only 15 per year at high level going to citations, meaning that we have to go to court with them. Is that correct?
Meaning whether we give them a handwritten ticket on the spot or take them to court. Yes, there have been years where we've had 3,000 complaints in 1 year. Since COVID, our numbers have gone down, and we're just now starting to see numbers go up as far as tenants complaining, but you also have a lot of tenants who are being threatened by eviction for whatever those reasons are. And then we had an uptake in neighbor complaints, and just this week alone, last week alone, we had 19 cases, and out of that, if I remember, 10 of those were neighbor complaints against each other. One today, and the others, one was a commercial, which we don't address the commercial part of it. So our numbers are lower than we normally see them, but I think it's on its way back up because people are just starting to kind of recover from the COVID era.
May I continue?
Yeah, but I just wanted to clarify. So you're saying that the numbers of complaints does not necessarily represent the scope of the problems in the city? And that
yeah, at the moment, we're starting to see it. And one of the things that I think the public, especially when they call us, they need to realize is that our complaints when they come in, one complaint can take 20 minutes. One complaint can take 3-4 days or longer to address because we're dealing with tenants and owners. And some of them are harder. Some of them involve bringing the health department in and working with Heidi and working with the fire department and working with Bob Mack from welfare. So there are those cases that are very inundated with a lot of things that we need to work with. Some examples of properties that are hoarders. That requires bringing people of adult and elderly services, bringing in the health department, so that they can take hours and hours to work on. So one of our cases, we may have 400 cases, but those 400 cases are taking up hundreds of hours of work for one code officer.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you for everything that you're doing. I just want to kind of back to one of the things you said about the overgrowth. So as an alderman, and I'm sure other aldermen get the same thing, I get the complaint, the property owner's overgrowth, I can no longer see safely to come to an intersection, or my child has to go out onto the street because the sidewalk is being blocked. Oftentimes I've said to them, well, you can call Public Works and see if they can work with the people to trim it down. Would that be code enforcement or would that be Public Works? I get a lot of those calls, so.
Good question. Good question.
Does Public Works know you're doing this?
The way,
I do call Public Works, yes, and I get a hemming and hawing and kind of like, well, maybe this isn't ours, maybe it's, yeah.
well, we get complaints from anyone and everyone regarding anything and everything. We then determine, we're one of the few departments that will say it's not our problem. We hear what it is, and then we find out who they need to reach out to. Because we get a lot of thank you notices for that. If it is a line of sight as far as a corner view, okay, that is under the National Land Use Code. So we will enforce that for the zoning department because it is, they're part of community development, and that is a violation. A corner, what we call a triangular view.
Right.
Then we'll get complaints, as what you're saying, obstructing a sidewalk and so forth. We'll get the calls, and we will also either refer them or tell them to call DPW.
Okay.
So DPW can see if they can go evaluate it. We'll still have a code officer sometimes go by, and we just had one, I think it was Arlington, and the code officer went by, talked to the owner, he trimmed everything down. But we cannot force that owner to do it.
Okay.
That's the whole key, is that when you're talking about the corner view, triangular view, we can force them to do that because we have an ordinance that says you can't do that.
Okay.
When it comes to obstructing a sidewalk or making people walk out into the street, we can tell you that you need to trim it down, but we can't force you to. They would, we would, at that point, we would coordinate with DPW and streets and see what can be done. And I look at Matt for that because that's been a big topic in the last couple of years.
May
Yes, but I would like to remind the committee, we do have to get through.
to the other thing.
ID.
I will make this just, that particular comment real quick, and then I do have one other question about the rent increase. When I worked with Public Works on it, the comment that I get from them is that they'll notify the owner. If the owner doesn't do it, then the city may come in and do it. And the truth is, this year has probably been inordinate because of the type of weather we've had. The rain, the heat, multiple growth. So I just, after listening to this, I didn't want everybody calling you if in some situations they should call Public Works.
Oh,
one less thing off your plate. But if I may, and this will, I'll try to make this one my last comment. Because of the lack of stock, people are anxious about making complaints for fear that they will be evicted or rent increase. You made a comment about that you can talk to them about evictions, but not rent increase. And one of the things I heard most recently was that when a person complained to their landlord, the landlord said, well, you got a choice. I can increase your rent and fix that, or I can leave your rent as it is and you just deal with it. Is that something, would they still be allowed to do that? And from the landlord's point of view, if it's something large and it's got to come out of their pocket, I can understand the need to go for rent. So I'm not complaining about that. I'm just bringing it out. So
a violation is a violation,
right,
whether they're being evicted or not. So if it is a violation that needs to be addressed, for us, we just keep adding to the landlord makes that repair. What he decides to do after that, that's their issue.
Okay.
But in the interim, while it's an active code complaint, our goal is to obligate that landlord, obviously always better willingly, but to obligate him and inform him or educate him that this is a violation whether you increase your rent or not, or his rent, you still need to make that repair.
thank you. If I have any other questions, I'll contact you. I'm not shy. Thank you.
Director Peak. Did I get your title right?
Nope. Heidi Peak, Kokoka, Nashua's health officer.
Okay, Health Officer Peak.
Yes.
Copeland.
And if you stumble over the Kakoka, it's fine. It's a
Okay.
really tricky one, and I have to remind myself when I'm signing it, I have to do a KU, LKA in my head in order to get it. As far as, I think I can safely, quickly discuss our differences from code enforcement. And we have other programs that we run that take the majority of our time. We're a small department as well. We have 6 people, and 3 of those people are our environmental health specialists who conduct food service inspections, pool sampling, pool inspections, go out to complaints that can be general complaints, very much like what Nelson was describing, or they could be specifically food-related or pool-related, some place where there is a license that gives us more ability to handle things. And I will say that of the more housing-like complaints that I've heard lately, there is a fair amount of fear of retaliation. And I know in light of what's going on with housing stock, how do I say this? It's a more methodical, careful approach with some of these things. And a lot of our complaints, if it's addressed under the housing code, I will hand them or guide them to code enforcement because there is that protection that is offered the tenant. And I see that the cases are far more complex than what we've dealt with in a long time. We can deal with single-family owner-occupied homes, but it has to be something that is really threatening to the person who's there, or it has to be something that affects the general public's health, like an huge accumulation of trash or raw sewage leaking, something along those lines. It has to be fairly dramatic for us to get involved in something like that. And it's determining what is the general public's health. It's not necessarily the person living there. So that's kind of a subtlety as well. But, so our complaints have been increasing as well. We have had some neighbor disputes and some people who request anonymity because they don't want their next door neighbor to know what they're complaining about. So it's a little tricky, and it's been some careful navigating in some of these things because we don't want to jeopardize tenancy. And that we've never really been so mindful of that, having been directly involved with the encampment meetings and some of the activities that are going on. We don't want that for people. And we're also seeing a very vulnerable population be more affected by things that are going on in the community, such as our aging population. I know from the fire department, we get a copy of a lot of the lift assists that the fire department makes, and we follow up when it's appropriate. But those are some complex cases that sometimes the resolution is pretty quick. Sometimes it's months because we need to make referrals, get Bureau of Elderly and Adult Services involved, see what's offered. But a lot of what we do too is we act in an advisory capacity. So we will say if it's something that isn't necessarily under our jurisdiction or there is no real law like mold. We know it's a health hazard. We understand that, but there are no federal standards. So we typically look for the source of the moisture and we have them approach code enforcement if it's something that sounds valid. And then what we do on our end is we will tell people how to clean it if it's for them, how they can protect their belongings. It's pretty much like what we do for bed bugs as well. Since the bed bug law changed, we act in an advisory capacity, and we refer people to legal assistance and the other entities out there who can offer them advice. So there's a lot of hand-holding. There is a lot of time spent with people that isn't necessarily condemning a property as unfit for human habitation, because that's the last thing we want to do. And it's gotta be an immediate threat in order to do that, or there's no good solution. And because I work right across the hall from Bob Mack, he always knows what's going on with us. And I think that's really, it's more the differences. We will also, especially if a license is involved, we can deal with commercial properties. And I'm trying to think of the last one that you sent my way.
It was a dumpster complaint.
Yeah. Am looking to start a ticketing process for some of the non-food service dumpsters in the area that are overflowing and just might call rodents, come here and eat. So we're looking at doing some of that as well.
With regards to both presentations, it seems like a common factor here is that the complexity of calls this is much more than an inspection at this point, and there is a degree of case management. It sounds like both of you work with welfare assistance, but would it be an area for the city to explore to have maybe more public health rather than city welfare level case management, or navigators, or people to kind of pull together these different cases and do the longer term follow-up? Because public health versus city welfare, I understand that city welfare is a subdivision of community health, but it's not the same mission.
Right.
The city welfare is basically acting on the constitutional mandate we have to help people without resources.
Right.
Whereas there may be people with resources, and particularly they need resources pulled together and organized in order to resolve some of the issues the city sees.
Yeah, and when I say that I'm across the hall with Bob trying to figure some of this out, I should say specifically it's what would you theoretically be able to do if I have to say that this person can no longer live here? So it's a heads up, and kind of I'll have gained some of the knowledge when I'm on site talking to the people at stake, and just kind of trying to figure it out, kind of doing some of that case management on the site, just while they're there and engaged. We do have, if it comes to a language difficulty, we do have community health workers who can go out with us and will be able to translate for us. But yeah, I don't know what it looks like to move ahead with something like that.
Councilman Clee?
Yes, to piggyback on a comment that you made, Mr. Ortega made it clear that he does not deal with commercial properties, and you made a comment about commercial properties, and you specifically said a dumpster. So my question is going to be not necessarily a commercial property per se, but maybe a construction site where there's a dumpster, the workers are putting food in it, plus there's a variety of different things and so on. While I won't divulge the location, I can tell you there was one in Ward 3. As I'm talking to the constituents and the wind is blowing out the trash from the dumpsters and so on, and the amount of flies that I'm going like this as we're talking, I got a hold of the contractor and did that. But for those residents involved, if they could not reach me or something like that, would that be something that would fall within your area? It's not necessarily, it could be a construction of a home or a bunch of properties, not necessarily commercial, but would that be something that they could deal with you? This is pretty bad, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Where it is potentially a health hazard, certainly we can.
Yeah, the amount of flies was absolutely like bouncing off me. It was driving me crazy. I personally did get a hold of the contractor and the people involved, but I think if this ever happened again, I would like them to involve your office. So thank you very much. I did not know that, and I appreciate that knowledge now. Thank you, Alderman.
Alderman Timmons, any questions? It's always discouraging to hear that there are things that we can't do something about. Bed bugs particularly, it's not generally
Yes.
understood by the public that they're not a health risk, so there isn't legislation requiring landlords to do much with them. Can you speak to that?
Sure, and I'll let Nelson bump in if that's okay, with any additional comments. I find that we end up doing a lot of, okay, this is the law, these are your resources, if you qualify for legal assistance, these are the people you should call. I think Nelson has a better grasp of the form and all of that, but what we end up doing is, okay, make your bed an island. Sometimes we do visits to try and figure something out for them, but we spend a lot of time on educating what they can do, what they should not have thrown out, what they shouldn't get rid of, what they can keep, and how to navigate dealing with a pest company, and what to ask, and what you need to do yourself.
I mean, I can quickly try and let you know a little how the bed bug law works. When it was passed, code enforcement years ago used to go out and actually do bed bug inspections, and we're all still in shock that we never took any home. But it used to be pretty bad, and it sort of kind of still is. But when a tenant feels they don't have to know that they have it, if they even believe they have bed bugs, they're required. The RSA says that they're to notify their landlord, be it in writing, verbally, or through a third party. We sometimes function as that third party, so we can let a landlord know that the tenant is complaining. So no matter which one of those three choices they make, the landlord must inspect the apartment within 7 days of that complaint. And the landlord must also inspect the abutting units to that. Once the landlord, if the landlord doesn't do any of that within 7 days, then the tenant is required to go to district court and file a 548 complaint against that landlord. If the landlord does address it and does hire a pest company, there's nothing that says that it has to be a pest company, but if he does, most of them do, then if 3 months down the road or something, the tenant just feels that it's not working or it's not enough, the landlord they just have to show that there's been a substantial reduction of bed bugs. What the substantial reduction number is, at that point, it depends on what a judge decides, because it does become a court issue if the tenant just feels that the landlord hasn't eradicated enough of them or is not doing it on a continuous basis, then they go to court and they file for their complaint, either themselves or through an attorney. Most of them will call legal aid, because obviously a lot of individuals that we work with can't afford to go hire an attorney. And then at that point, the judge decides, okay, what are the evidences? We don't get involved in any, other than notifying the landlord, potentially notifying the landlord, hey, your tenant at this location filed a complaint. And we will, even though we don't investigate it, we still take the complaint in, we still log it to show that there was a record of a bed bug complaint made at this property. And we hang on to that. So if anybody calls us later on and say, hey, do you have any records of bed bugs here? We will look. If we do, we let them know. And I had one today that she called, and I left her copies of the past complaints of bed bugs in the development, not necessarily in her building, but in the development that she lives in. And one of her issues for that is because the landlord wanted to charge her, or at one point did charge her for the eradication of bed bugs. But a landlord can try to charge an attorney, a tenant, if they feel that they started it. But the rule, and I'm not an attorney, but the short version of the law is that the way it looks is that if a tenant, if they've been there 6 months or less, if they can show that 6 months prior to their moving in, there were complaints in there for that 6-month period, then that throws in the doubt of whether they actually bought it in or not. It could have been a tenant upstairs or downstairs that actually bought it in. So that's kind of just the gist of how that law is supposed to work.
As a point of clarification, you also mentioned that they have to hire someone to treat it, but that the person doesn't necessarily have to be an exterminator?
No, actually, what I mentioned is that they don't, as far as our ordinances go, they don't have to hire they can try and do it themselves. If they do it themselves, according to our legal department, from years back when I asked, they still at least have to follow the recommendations of whatever the Department of Agriculture is for that particular pesticide.
Okay, so energy healing isn't good enough to actually have to use products and...
What was that?
Energy healing isn't good enough to actually have to use procedures and...
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, you'd be surprised to see what some of the do-it-yourself solutions are.
I would not, but I think most people would be.
Yeah.
Any questions over here?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. So, like I said, our committee's main purpose is to focus on human affairs and to make sure that we're attending to the issues that were previously addressed by the Substandard Living Conditions Committee. I know that your departments come and present annually on what the city's doing and what they're working on. It's important because, I mean, as you both pointed out, the situation and the conditions change. So, trying to stay abreast of that. Major audio.
It's been like this for a couple weeks. It's been like this for a couple weeks.
It's like our local fireworks show. So your departments are a huge resource as part of that, so we appreciate it. And ultimately, we see when our systems start to break down and people are forced to be evicted or can no longer maintain housing situations, and the problem doesn't go away, the people don't go away. It just takes on an even worse form. So any final comments? Anything else you want to let us know about?
Not from my side right now.
Okay, well, I appreciate both of you coming in and taking the time to give us that information.
Actually, at one point I wanted to make is that from my years of working in the city and with Nelson and other entities across the city, is that Nashua has a unique flavor, if you will, of coordinated work and working together. I hear other jurisdictions, they don't have that going for them. So I'm very proud of the effort that we all take in reaching out to differing departments and divisions to try and address problems for the benefit of the tenants and the residents.
Mr. Ortega, you want to give us an idea of what it takes to be a code enforcement person?
Well, in today's world, being able to work with angry people.
Yeah.
That's every field, though.
No, it does take there are very few complaints these days that we take that don't end with, if you don't do something, I'm gonna go punch them, or we're gonna go to war. So, I mean that seriously, code officers now have to watch what they do. I mean, there was just a code officer in a shot in a resident because of a lack of understanding, a resident, killed because of that. So in Texas, so we're careful, but we look for someone who's very good in either they have a law enforcement background, code enforcement background from another municipality, psychology degrees, CJ degrees, psychology degrees. We look at those more than we do like business administration degrees type thing. We need someone who isn't afraid to go out and talk to the community, isn't afraid to knock on a door and talk to someone, be it on the phone, in person, or public speaking. And unfortunately, I haven't been getting, from the few applicants that did apply, I haven't not been getting that type of response. But they're welcome to look on the national website and see what the requirements are.
We also have a job fair coming up on September 12th at the library, so if we give people an idea of kind of what's involved, I mean, you said someone with a psychology degree or law enforcement background, it's not impossible. You can get case managers who might be sick of doing medical billing all the time, or one area, but they have skills that are transferable to another, so.
And I look at that, and I do look at that, because many jobs deal with, if you're a customer service person here, it doesn't mean you can't work with the general public in person. But there are just a lot of little things that I look at when when an application comes before me. Former firefighters, former well-rounded people who've worked in the construction field, but it has to fit with the community. I just don't want to put someone in there that just is not going to work with the community.
Well, I think we definitely appreciate that. It keeps the department standards high, and I don't think anybody would fault the code enforcement director for being discerning on a resume. Kind of your job is to be attentive to detail. So hopefully you'll get the help that you're looking for. We'll get your department up to full strength, and we'll be able to tackle this issue collectively as a community instead of just as a department.
May I make a comment?
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Ortega, I know there's a number of open cases in Ward 3 that you and Director Sullivan have been working with, and I know they haven't always been the most pleasant cases sometimes. I appreciate all that you do, and I want to reiterate something you said, that sometimes you guys are put into harm's way, and I don't think the public realizes that. When you have to tell someone they're doing something wrong and they don't think that they are. In today's society, there's a lot of anger out there, so I really appreciate, and the same thing with you, Ms. Peak. I know if you've got to go to a business and tell them either you do this or we're shutting you down, you're going to get a lot of anger and nastiness, so bless you and your staff, and thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Next on our agenda, and if you want to have a seat, if you want to stay for the library presentation, feel free. Next, we'll be talking about the home program, American Rescue Plan. Manager Long, if you want to come up and have a seat, or if you'd like to use the podium, you're welcome to do whichever you're more comfortable with.
Good evening again. If you have your packets, the home presentation should be right after the agenda in the packet. I believe it was at the last meeting, I was requested to put together a little bit of information on the home ARP program. That is the $1.6 million we are receiving through the American Rescue Plan Act, specifically for our home program. For anyone who might be listening now or later, our home program is, that's federal grant money through U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, specifically for the creation and retention of affordable housing. And the home ARP funds are very interesting. It's very different from the regular home program. So the $1.6 million, we've adopted an allocation plan, kind of broadly outlining our community needs and how we will be spending those funds. We allocated $100,000 for supportive services, $100,000 for tenant-based rental assistance, a little over $1 million for development of affordable rental housing, the actual construction, bricks and mortar, a little under $81,000 for nonprofit capacity building, and $242,000 for administration and planning. The biggest thing to know about these funds is, whereas general home program is affordable housing for low to moderate income, so you're looking at 80% of the area mean income and below, but home ARP is for specific qualifying populations. That's homeless residents, residents at risk of homelessness, residents who are fleeing or attempting to flee, domestic violence, dating violence, sexual violence, and trafficking. And the last population is other populations for whom supportive services would help prevent homelessness or serving those at greatest risk of housing instability. And I'm not gonna go over the slides one by one unless you'd really like to, but one of the things to know is, like, what does homeless mean? What does greatest risk of housing instability mean? These terms all have very specific definitions outlined by Housing and Urban Developments, and they're very program specific. A lot of the people who will be applying for these funds might be unfamiliar, especially if it's the kinds of organizations you're used to applying for the regular home program. They're mostly not already serving homeless folks, so they'll need guidance for that. On the other hand, people who don't normally apply for home but would be interested in applying for home ARP, I'm thinking kind of homeless shelter, homeless shelters, homeless services providers, those kinds of organizations. They'll be familiar with these definitions. They are familiar with other HUD grants, but they won't know necessarily how the home program generally works. That is why we allocated the funds we did for nonprofit capacity building, because kind of those two separate kind of nonprofits will probably need guidance and possibly specific staff to help them implement these projects. So unless there are questions about the definitions for the qualifying populations, I was gonna just go ahead and skip over that. Okay. So eligible uses, what we can use these funds for. So the biggest bucket of funds we set out is for the actual construction of affordable housing. So we can do new rental housing units, we can acquire existing housing units, and we can also do refinancing of existing affordable housing. We generally don't do refinancing. I would be surprised if we got any applications in that realm for this. I anticipate that most of what we will receive applications for will be construction of new housing. We did not choose to allocate funds for non-congregate shelter, and we did not choose to allocate funds towards nonprofit operating expenses. We did choose to allocate funds, as previously mentioned, for nonprofit capacity building. And we are also choosing to require for an agency to apply for those funds, they must also be applying for a rental housing development project. We also set aside funds for tenant-based rental assistance. That is something that you can do under the regular home program, but it's not something we've really done in the past. There's a number of different forms of assistance that can take the form of. That's payment of rent itself, security deposits, utility payments, a few other categories of funding. And we are also anticipating that this will be in the form of the grant will go to an agency that does tenant-based rental assistance, and that agency will manage the funds. Supportive services, we also chose to allocate funds towards. And there are three categories of that. These include McKinney-Vento services. McKinney-Vento Act is one of the larger pieces of legislation that controls homeless services. You might be most familiar with it in terms of, it's called the McKinney-Vento Liaison. All school districts must have one. That was part of that legislation. And there's specific definitions of homelessness that McKinney-Vento contains. Homelessness prevention and housing counseling. And again, a lot of technical assistance and capacity building, I think, will be required for the provision of these services, because there's a lot of technical details related to each of those categories, how they're defined, what is housing counseling, what is not housing counseling. So again, that's why we've set aside the capacity building funds. And the last slide in the packet is eligible uses in terms of McKinney-Vento supportive services. What are those? It's pretty broad. There's a lot of different services that can qualify. Just if you were childcare, education, food, employment assistance, life skills training. And these are a lot of services that many of our area nonprofit agencies already provide. And that's kind of the quick overview of home ARP. If anything wasn't clear, if there's any questions, I'm happy to help clarify.
Thank you. I have to go back, my note. I know what it was. You commented about that one of the things we don't usually do or don't usually see or refinancing. What exactly would be refinancing? And the reason I'm saying it is because knowing that interest rates are skyrocketing, and if someone needed to be able to do additional housing or something like that with this.
Yes. So in terms of home ARP, it would be only refinancing if it's also paired with making it so the housing is serving lower incomes. So it couldn't just be if refinancing to retain the housing at the current income level for those tenants. It would have to be so that it becomes even more affordable. So like if it's affordable at 60% area median income, if that particular property owner or developer wanted to instead serve 30% area median income, that's something we could do.
Thank you.
Just with regards to the city's decisions about non-segregate shelter care and then also nonprofit operating, is this plan proposed in application form, or is this a plan that's already been accepted that you're presenting that we have, and this is what we applied for specifically for?
So the allocation plan was adopted by the Board of Aldermen in March of 2023. So these are this. If we want to change this, that's something we can do. It would require a substantial amendment process, but we can absolutely change that if we do want to do so.
I didn't necessarily have anything in mind. I just wanted to know whether we could, if a stakeholder showed up and said, hey, we have a project in which we might say want to have individualized housing programs for a specific reason, or another organization were saying, we're willing to expand our programs to accommodate something the city might be facing, but we don't have the staff to do it. That might be nonprofit operating versus capacity building. For example, if we, like last year, we were able to engage a number of nonprofits in sharing support for cooling stations, warming stations, but the biggest concern was there wasn't money to pay additional staff, and there wasn't really a mechanism for doing that. And so most of the cold weather emergency warming stations essentially were only operating 9 to 5, so good for a time, and then there's a problem.
No, totally understandable. I believe when we were having our discussions about how to allocate the funds, I believe part of the factor there was that might fit better under a community development block grant than the home grant, since both nonprofit operating expenses and shelter projects are both they're the bread and butter of CDBG.
Mm-hmm. My purpose wasn't to advocate for any particular thing. It was just to point out that there may be situations that are encountered. If we see emergency rooms, for example, starting to overflow, and we have a partner who has a facility that may at one point have been like meant for medical hospice care, but then they don't have staff to run something, then there may be a scenario where the city needs that flexibility. So your answer was that it could be changed if we needed to. It would just be a bit of a process.
Yes, that's correct. It would be a substantial amendment process, and it's not a hardship. It was just, we would have a public input process, much as we did during the initial adoption.
Just a comment for the public that might be listening, and you can verify this, I guess, with the slides as well. McKinney-Vento's definition of homelessness doesn't just mean you're living outside. It could mean you were recently discharged from like an institutionalized kind of situation, like maybe a mental health center or a nursing home. I'm trying from memory, so I don't want to be wrong. If you had multiple instances of homelessness in like the last 2 months because of economic needs, like you had a start and a stop kind of situation. Or if you're living in a place, in someone else's home, basically, where you don't have any kind of lease or guarantee of stay or anything like that?
Yes, so the McKinney-Vento definition is actually about 2 pages worth of text. Briefly summarized, there's a few different categories of what do we mean by homeless. The first definition is individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And then there's a bunch of text explaining what does and doesn't count for that. Or an individual or family who imminently lose their primary nighttime residence, provided that a number of different factors. There's a specific carve out for unaccompanied youth under 25 years of age. They're included in the definition. And also individuals and families fleeing domestic or sexual violence.
So someone can't say, oh, you have a house on paper, but like the abuser's living there, so they don't.
Yes, that's included in the definition of homeless.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify because having worked with the homeless for many, many years, I find that people don't recognize that they're in a situation of homelessness until it's identified for them in a lot of cases. And they're like, I mean, I guess I've really been homeless a lot longer than I thought I was. You know, I've been staying with this friend and then that friend and then that friend and that friend, but I had a roof over my head, and that's not always the same thing as having a home.
No, that's absolutely correct. And you know, we're in the process of ironing out all the details of the grant application process and the notice of funding availability. And when that is ready to go out, we will be having pre-application workshops for agencies to discuss all of this in detail, especially the ones who maybe don't work with homeless populations on a regular basis, to be like, here's what we mean when we say homeless, here's what homelessness means for home ARP. And hopefully, so everyone understands populations that need to be served and what the money can and can't be used for.
Now, is your office working directly with the Continuum of Care's executive committee as they go through their NOFA process? Because if I remember at the last meeting that they had, they actually pointed out they needed people who weren't going to be recipients of the HUD grants that they're doing to help them rank and score. And that might also be a good opportunity for the city to see, okay, well, if these programs aren't going to make the cut, maybe we should help find a way for them to make the cut, a different cut, you know?
So at this point, we've discussed home ARP at several continuum of care meetings. We don't currently plan to merge it with the continuum of care processes, mostly because the continuum of care is very, the coordinated entry process of selecting clients is very embedded in the continuum of care, and we cannot use coordinated entry for home ARP selection. But instead, the plan was to, you know, when our NOFO is ready to go out, to mention it very prominently to the continuum of care, since we imagine that most of those agencies will be very interested in this funding.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily suggesting you try to merge the programs, but so much as the development office, your department, be a participant in the assessment process that the Continuum is doing, because they need people. The Continuum is made up of agencies that are receiving funds mostly. So as part of their review process, they actually need the decisions to be vetted by people who are not receiving funds. And so they struggle sometimes within their own membership to find people. And that might be an opportunity for you to serve two goals where, number one, you're helping rank the programs, but number two, you're finding out from those rankings who might be a better fit for the home programs.
No, that's a great idea, and certainly we're well positioned to do that since we do not receive funding through the COC.
Okay, just a suggestion. I think their meeting's next Thursday. Alderman Timmons?
Thank you, Chairman Lopez. Thank you for noticing me. Well, anyway, hello, Director Long. Some of the things seem a little problematic. Okay, one is I think the program is great in theory, but in the application, I find it problematic. And the reason why I find it problematic, because we don't have housing. Here you said construction of new rental housing units, but they're market rate, not affordable. Acquisition of existing housing units. We can't find units. We can't find housing. Perfect example, today, my granddaughter went to the library to return some books. And she said, Grandma, what are we gonna do about the homeless? I was like, what a coincidence. We're working on that tonight. But she had a point, and she said, ask Mr. Long, are mental health services extended to them as well? I know they have shelter, but what about mental services after you get the shelter? And if they can stay in those shelters until permanently without falling back homelessness. And that's the biggest issue. One, we don't have space. We need to build space for affordable housing. We just don't have them. We don't have space, we don't have the location, we don't have a lot of things. So in the application, this may not work. In theory, it does look good. So can you answer those questions, and how are we gonna deal with homelessness when we don't have the capability?
Right, so tackling the first part of the question, the housing to be built through home ARP funds, it must be affordable for these populations. That will be a requirement. And as I mentioned, I think what we're going to be looking at is creation of new housing versus renovation or refinancing. And because we need more. So I very strongly suspect we're going to be getting applications primarily for creation of new housing. In terms of services, I know many of our homeless shelters provide case management to their clients. I don't believe most of them provide direct mental health services. They'll refer out to our area mental health agencies for that. But that's absolutely a component of care provided. Everyone's very aware that those services are very, very desperately needed. I will mention a little bit outside the scope of home ARP, but the model of permanent supportive housing, which HUD has been pushing for many years now, that is intended to incorporate ongoing long-term case management, which in many cases will include mental health services for folks once they've been safely housed in a permanent housing situation.
Okay.
Can I have one follow-up, please?
Sure.
Director Long, you did not answer my question about where we're going to build these houses. Where in Nashua? We're talking about Greater Nashua. Not Greater Nashua, but Nashua.
Yes.
Where?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have very specific answers at this point, which I apologize for. I think probably what we'll need to be looking at is density, I think is one of the answers to that in terms of a model for that is the Bronstein redevelopment, what's now Monahan Manors, replacing fairly low density housing with higher density housing. And so I'm guessing we'll be seeing project applications for either in the downtown or close to the downtown, because that's the area kind of most conducive to that kind of density. But obviously we'll accept applications for anywhere in the city, assuming that's a location that the agency has, either owns or thinks it can reasonably own.
May I?
Alderman Timmons.
One other question. I think Mr. Sullivan may be able to answer this question better because he may know where and what kind of shelters we have available. And can we do this as soon as possible? Like start it before the cold weather seeps in? If he may answer my question about where we're going to put these people, it's really concerning.
Director Sullivan, do you have an answer for that?
Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director. So Alderwoman Timmons, to partially address your question, and I'm going to speak specifically to several unsheltered encampments that exist around the city, some of which in the Temple Street corridor and some in smaller forms in other areas of the city. I'm going to give you a somewhat non-answer, but I'm doing that because we are actually actively working on this problem. We're just not ready to talk specifically about what the solution might be. But there's a coalition of city departments and divisions meeting on a regular basis to discuss specifically how individuals might be displaced when the colder winter months allow, or other circumstances change in the areas where encampments have been identified, and some level of unsheltered individual census has been developed as well. And so specifically our emergency management director, the police department, certainly the fire department, public health, and others are working actively on identifying what exactly the process will be, whether that will involve an actual created shelter area, whether that will involve more of a warming station approach or a combination of those two. That has not been yet determined. But what I can say is that over the last 2 to 3 months, there's been a very real focus from a sort of a multi-jurisdictional level about being prepared for the winter of 2023-2024. and not being in a position where we need to necessarily rely on existing nonprofits and other agencies to stand up shelters on an emergency need-by-need basis. I think there's been a pretty clear recognition of the fact that that approach worked for a period of time, but that the city needs to take a much more proactive approach heading into this winter season. And so again, I can't say exactly what the solution will be, but all I can do at this point is assure you that we are having that conversation. And also looking to other communities in the region and nationally to learn lessons both in the positive and for the negative about how this has been responded to elsewhere. And so to Manager Long's comments, we're not exactly sure what the solution will be or what the sort of the affordable housing silver bullet might be, but relative to the unsheltered population, we're working on trying to resolve that and be prepared for the winter. And I'd be happy to answer specific follow-up questions too, because I expect you might have them based on what I've said.
I do.
Okay.
Maybe this is not the time right now, but I do
Okay.
have a lot of questions regarding the homelessness.
Sure.
Because I'm really concerned about them.
Mm-hmm.
And we see them everywhere, and they seem like they're growing in population. So I just want to know, what do we have in place for them? Not to send them to Manchester or any other place, but to help them right here in Nashua, and that's my concern.
Mr. Chair, if I may just maybe follow up. So that's certainly our concern as well, and you referenced sort of the idea of moving folks along to another community. That's not the approach that this leadership is taking or this administration is taking. We're very much trying to be able, we're trying to create an environment where they feel comfortable remaining in the community with access to services that they so desperately need. You know, we don't want to call this a downtown challenge, but it really is, because that's where our services and that's where a community has been built of unsheltered individuals. And so we want to have a solution that's conducive to them being able to live in that space where they're comfortable. I want to just emphasize again that in order to implement something that will be successful long-term, it's going to take the cooperation of all of the partners here in the city internally, but also the folks involved with the continuum of what as well. So I want to acknowledge their efforts. This is such a massive problem as we're seeing in other communities. Everyone has a bit of a different perspective on just how to solve it. We're trying to come up with the perfect solution, but I think we're quickly realizing that it's going to be a level of compromise to have something that actually works. But all agencies involved have already done tremendous work. We're just really, as the city, looking to fill in sort of a final gap to have a more permanent solution created that we feel comfortable with. And so I'd be happy to connect with you offline and talk about our progress as we go along. We're actually going to probably be having some more formal reports to the board or to some subcommittees about what we're doing. We're just not in a position yet where we can do that definitively. So happy to follow up individually or with this committee moving forward.
I would like to make some comments quickly. The urgency that Alderman Timmons and her family feels is, I think, in my opinion, very, very valid, because she's right. It is going to start getting colder. We got a little taste of that a couple of days ago, and that's only a taste. And we've had, throughout the summer, a number of weather-related emergencies, whether it was heat emergencies or random monsoons, that people who are unsheltered and living outside are very much vulnerable to. So the urgency is warranted, but I think Director Sullivan, you'd be the first to say that some caution is warranted too, because there are a number of programmatic landmines we can step on and that we may already be experiencing shocks from. When one partner isn't collaborative and decides, for example, that it's going to contain people who might be at various campsites into one area and super concentrates an issue and increases its sustainability, that creates problems for the rest of the community. When another entity comes and threatens to disperse campsites because they've decided that they don't want to know where it is, that creates a problem for the whole community. And that has happened in neighboring communities. So a large number of the people that are in those campsites are Nashua residents, but a large number of them are also from other places that were displaced, or are Nashua residents that have been ping-ponged around the state over the past couple of years. So immediate solutions without planning and without collaboration don't necessarily do anything for people who are actually experiencing that difficulty. A number of the emergency shelter programs that operate in the city, and the emergency shelter, the National Soup Kitchen shelter is the most obvious one, but there are other different levels of respite care or peer-supported programs or transitional housing programs that meet that criteria, including the rescue missions, which are major players. They may look at the fundamental concept of mental health care differently. And the residents who are, the residents who are in the shelters may have their own opinions about whether they want mental health treatment. Not a small number of them may have had very bad experiences recently with, being, involuntarily admitted and then losing housing while the state hospital is trying to figure out what to do with them. So you add that to the fact that a lot of our mental health service capacity has been impaired over the last couple of years. And there isn't an easy solution. You can't just provide mental health services to everybody in the shelter. I know because I've been trying to. I know Greater Nashua is struggling with capacity issues and organizational challenges where maybe some funding would be helpful, but maybe it's similar to our code enforcement where you can put an ad out there for months and you're not going to see somebody who actually has the qualifications for the job ready for it. There are regional issues too where licensures weren't accessible to mental health practitioners, to substance abuse counselors. The governor had to threaten to dissolve the Board of Mental Health if they didn't move forward. So we're seeing some pretty seismic shifts and addresses that are finally addressing issues that have been long-term systemic, but we're also seeing the danger of people moving too quickly and coming up with short-term solutions, which we have seen in other communities where they tried to stand up shelters in a short order, and those shelters collapsed pretty spectacularly, and unfortunately for the people who were involved. So as Director Sullivan says, we need to make sure that we're creating a solution that addresses the needs of the people as they present today, but also stays with them and is effective. Finally, I would point out that we've had several attempts to try to do the Housing First model, and we've had any number of programs that have come up with an abundance of vouchers and given people vouchers and handing them out. And now we have a problem where lots of people have vouchers. There's no housing stock. But in the past, we had problems where vouchers were given to people and then those follow-up supports weren't provided. And many of those people are the ones who are not so enthusiastic about mental health providers at this point, because 2 years ago, they were part of the movement to end chronic homelessness and nobody followed up. So now they don't qualify for any of the things they qualified for before and their vouchers are expired. So we do have to maintain a collective partnership with the different organizations that are addressing this, and we have to be very forthcoming in what we can offer as a city and very discerning in what they're asking for as nonprofits. And I think we're seeing much closer partnership and collaboration than I've seen in years. But that urgency, we can't release it. We have to continue to work on this as a crisis, not as a day-to-day operations. Director Sullivan, was there anything you want to add to that before?
No, I think well said, Alderman Lopez, and I think all that we know is that we need to do something. We're not sure exactly what that something will be, but to Alderman Lopez's points, I mean, there are a lot of very successful models across the country. There are a lot of very unsuccessful models, and in many cases, it's been the same model that simply hasn't worked in a unique community. And so, we're exploring sheltering. Will that be what we ultimately decide to do? I'm not sure as of this point in time. And so more to come over the next 3 months without question, because we recognize the cold weather is certainly coming. We'll start to see some signs of that soon. But I think certainly what I'm hearing is it warrants further conversation with this committee. It will warrant further conversation with the Board of Aldermen. And it likely won't be me representing the city in those conversations. I'm not the expert, but I'm definitely a partner in those conversations, and we'll be happy to connect you with the appropriate folks to talk to you.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you, Alderman Lopez, and thank you, Director Sullivan and Manager Long. And I don't have questions. I have thank yous is what I have. It's thank you for all that you're doing. Thank you for all you're doing. You've come to this board a number of times. I know we're probably your main gig, but and you take the time to explain, and you come back, which you did today with the home and the ARP program, and I do appreciate it. And Director Sullivan, I appreciate you being put on this spot. I know you're just one cog in that wheel, and so on. And I want to thank Alderwoman Timmons' granddaughter for taking the time to go to her grandmother and say, what are you doing about this? So I think that's a wonderful thing. And ultimately, I want to thank our chairman here. I know he works a lot with the homeless, and the Continuum of Care group, as does Alderwoman Tibbins, being on that committee and so on. But thank you for explaining all that to everybody. I think it's important, and pushing the urgency, but also understanding that at the same time we have to be hesitant to not open up a can of worms that shouldn't be opened up yet.
There also has to be a sort of stop-loss approach, which is why, as the chair, I've been bringing in the city departments, because it's very important to address homelessness when it presents itself. But anybody who's ever worked in a shelter knows and will tell you the best way to prevent homelessness is not to become homeless. So we need to make sure that our elderly residents and our vulnerable populations are aware of their rights and are being supported by the city so that we don't add to the problem.
Thank you.
Alderman Timmons, any final comments?
No, I do want to thank Director Long. Him and I work together pretty good. You know how I feel about a lot of things, and I'd like to thank you for doing what you do. You have a lot of energy.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that concludes our presentation on the home program. I'd like to, I guess, do I have to make a motion to accept the communication, or can we just move on? No?
Yeah, it's not part of our communication.
It comes up later.
It comes up later, yes.
So for now, I'd like to invite Library Director Jennifer McCormick, who's been super patient.
Actually, so busy. Did you want me to see what I can do about getting that up there? Yeah.
We have to keep an eye out for Alderman Kelly if she puts her hand up.
Yeah. This one.
I was going to mention that I appreciated Director Sullivan's remarks, especially around working to support homeless people who are here and not displacing them elsewhere. But I'm very involved in all of this work as well, and I think the work that you guys are doing is incredible and really important.
All right, thank you, Alderman Kelly. And so Director McCormick, want to take it away?
I will, thank you. So thank you for inviting me to make this presentation. I love to talk about the plaza renovation project. You're seeing my slideshow in kind of raw form here, but that's okay.
I apologize.
No, it's all right. I can, the
it's
menu
just a
bar
screen
is
share.
kind of in your way.
Okay.
That's what we see.
Yeah. Good.
Too many windows, it's crazy.
I know it is. I'm trying to not get her thing in that there. So,
Yep.
okay, we got your first one.
Okay, so next slide, please.
Okay.
I wanted to start by offering a little bit of a timeline for the renovation project. It feels like it's been going on forever. It's easy to lose track of what's happening. I did leave one date off. I should have included 1st September 1971. That's the day that's the month the library opened. And that's when the plaza as it stands now was originally constructed. And there have been very few improvements in the intervening 50, how many years? 52 years, 53 years. In January of 2019, thanks to the mayor, there was an RFP issued to design a renovated plaza, and IBI, CRJA IBI was selected to do that design. They worked with community input and city departments for several months, and in July presented the final concept that was chosen after the community input. In March of 2020, the city issued an RFP for constructing the renovated plaza, and there was some funding allocated. And I don't know the exact amount, and it doesn't matter because then COVID-19 happened and the city had to pull back from so many projects, and the library plaza was one of them. Then in September of 2022, I got a pleasant surprise and discovered that the plaza project was getting some ARPA funding. And I believe the amount, I think Director Sullivan, excuse me, reported accurately was $1.5 million. And that was enough to do phase 1 of the project. And I have a picture coming up that will show you what phase 1 was. And then thanks to Congresswoman Custer, we were awarded an additional $3 million later on in 2022. And just this spring, we went to work on redesigning the project and getting updated pricing. Next slide, please. I took some pictures this week of the current conditions. I know most of the people in this room come to the library frequently, but for those of you watching online, if you haven't been there recently, the slide on the top left is the walkway from the parking lot up to the front door. And that is a steep slope that is not handicapped accessible. The next photo to the right is the stairs leading from the main plaza up to that upper plaza. And as you can see, it's pretty badly deteriorated. It's in pretty terrible condition. It's still safe to use. That next slide is the fountain. That fountain stopped operating in 2018 or 2019, and the masonry is collapsed, and the Board of Trustees determined it was not worth trying to repair since a renovation was planned. It's sprouting a little bit of grass now. And on the bottom left, that slide shows you the upper courtyard space between the library and the Court Street Theater. And then that last slide is what it looks like when you were leaving the library and headed back down to the parking lot. And I tried to capture in that photo the way the pitch of the plaza has changed, which causes runoff, and we've had to just this summer install a rock apron along the side of the walkway because it was a trip hazard. So things are not looking good. 50 odd years later, the plaza's really seen a lot of great use, and it needs some TLC. Next slide, please. I wanted to remind folks the kinds of big citywide events that happen on the plaza. This is besides the one-off programs that we have, or families using the plaza, or Tai Chi using the plaza, or the Peacock players running out there for lunch during camp. Pride Festival happens on the plaza and in our parking lot every year. Nashua goes back to school, big event coming Thursday, don't forget. That happens every year. We have an outdoor concert series. We have a big summer reading kickoff party out there. Last year, the Library Plaza was one of the sites of the Art Walk. We hosted the first annual sustainability fair on the plaza this year, and we're also a venue for the holiday stroll. This is a heavily used park, and it should be a feature that we can be proud of that attracts people. Next slide. I threw in this slide. It's a little hard to see because of the scale, but this was the concept that was approved in 2019. And if you're looking at that slide, the area to the left edge is the library parking lot. And that first rectangle is active space. So those multicolored spot, that's play and fitness equipment, and immediately adjacent, the concept was of a sports court, could be futsal or some other activity. The center square is where we currently have concerts and other performances now. And the concept is to use the natural grading of the site to create an amphitheater feeling in that area and introduce infrastructure for performers like water supply, electrical supply. And on the very far right, that's the upper plaza between the library and Court Street Theater. And the concept at that time was to invent some reading rooms, so some spots, paved spots, hardscape spots where people could sit and read and enjoy some quiet study time. Next slide. Because of the deterioration of the stairs, which I showed in a photograph up to that upper plaza, we did have to redesign that upper part that had the reading rooms. And if you see, this drawing, by the way, is completely reversed from the last one I showed you. So now the left-hand side is the Court Street side. And we've worked with IBI to design, they call it a walk in the woods, but more meandering pathways with plenty of green space and a few trees. And that introduces the possibility of a pathway an accessible pathway for people to leave the Court Street Theater and get down to the library, enter that space from the sidewalk, and get down to the library. And also, the hope is that that area will house some of the sculptures that currently live on the library plaza. That middle space remains pretty much the same, although we're considering where a stage might fit in there and whether it's possible to create some kind of permanent stage structure rather than use the Parks and Rec mobile stage. And we're also reconsidering on the far right the details of that active space. The active space remains a high priority, but we are considering whether the materials for the resilient surface of the sports court is a good decision for that site. Are there some universal design principles we can apply and change up the equipment, as Director Sullivan referred to? So rather than playground equipment, have opportunities for interactive play and other kinds of active use and not just playground equipment. There's also some environmental conditions to take into account, and Director Sullivan might be able to speak better to that, but there's areas we had hoped to address in the plan, which we are not able to because of the asbestos cap on the site. So all of these are still in development. We've met with the architects recently. We'll meet with them again, and there'll be opportunities for public input for people to see what we have in mind and let us know what they think. Next slide. So these are our next steps, some environmental testing to do, and we'll schedule 1 or 2 public input sessions. Those will happen at the library. They're not scheduled yet, so stay tuned. We'll let you know. Then we'll go into the final design and have the bid documents prepared, and hopefully, rubber rabbit's foot or cross your fingers, construction will happen in 2024. The rain this year has been really great to the grass, but really not great to the plaza itself, and it's deteriorating rapidly. So your support and the Board of Aldermen's support is much appreciated. And if I may, I'm sorry, I meant to address, I don't recall who asked, earlier someone asked about security cameras.
Alderman Dowd did.
Yes, there are already security cameras on the library building that focus on that space.
I'm going to stop sharing. Is that okay?
Yep. All right, any big questions from the board? Alderman Clee.
Thank you so much for this. And I know it's just a high level kind
yes.
of, I don't want to say wish list, but of concepts of potential. And you'll, just for the public that's listening, you will firm it down more as you have the public hearings or input sessions or however you want to address those. And that will be part of the library will be holding that, not the Board of Aldermen. So people can attend those. And
correct.
you'll put those notifications and so on.
Yes, that's correct.
Probably on the website.
Yes.
I would assume, and we'll get that information out. So I do appreciate that. I know there have been a lot of comments, complaints about the overgrowth and so on. And to your comment about the rain, it's been horrific throughout the city. I know at Greeley Park, I had to ask them to put those, as you did, the rock formations alongside any of the asphalt, because it's just washing all away, and even Greeley Park, it was becoming quite dangerous for someone, and I do appreciate it. In some respects, it kind of looks nice, like we're actually doing some kind of, but it's more of a necessity, so thank you for doing that, and yes, I do hope that we can get construction in 2024. It's a beautiful space. It would be nice for the public to be able to use it. And to Alderman Lopez, who is the alderman in that location, I got at the Park Fest, someone was asking me if we could have a Greeley Park in Ward 4, and I said, I don't know if there's enough space for it. This would not be a Greeley Park in Ward 4, but it would be, if you had the stage, it would be something for the residents there. If you had a playground kind of area for residents that live in there that don't necessarily have that. I mean, Bronstein is coming up and they don't have that kind of playground type of thing. I know it's not going to be big, but anything that we can do to help the kids around the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
To Alderman Clee's point, I was going to actually point out that it's a pretty insightful idea to have the amphitheater there, because there are all kinds of people and stakeholders trying to organize events and activities in the downtown area. I know personally, having tried to organize the Tree Streets Block Party, downtown arts festivals, the Richelieu Clubs Fair, the cultural festivals, like all those different things. Finding a space and then getting the city stage to set up, you need so many different factors, and the library would not only be a place and a place with all of those amenities, but that could be very helpful for taxpayers, dare I say, in having quality programming on an ongoing basis that isn't entirely reliant on, you know, the library's staff and organizers and all that kind of stuff. Although I would say that like the organizing staff and the planning for events that are at the library is second to none. So you don't need any improvement, but it would be a very well used and welcome area. And while I wouldn't necessarily want exactly a Greeley Park in that area, because you know we have Mine Falls, which is like, it's like Greeley Park only bigger. We would like an amphitheater and performing area, and we've tried several areas to kind of like replicate that, and you know it's problematic. We have a great little location over at Los Amigos Park, for example, but there's no parking there. You have a little you have a little stage and a playground right there, but it doesn't matter if only 8 people can go to it. And you have French Renaissance Park, which has, you know, great horizontal strip kind of location, but then that parking becomes a problem and it's practically invisible from Main Street. So a lot of great events have been taking place at the library recently. Definitely can be a nod to your leadership, Director McCormick.
Oh, thank you.
And then I think people are starting to see the library and the concept of a library as changed and as something that they can still access, which is again very, very important for public libraries and a testament to the work your team's been doing.
Thank you.
Who was first?
Shoshana want to go first?
Alderman Timmons?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm is in favor of this. I can't wait for 2024. One, the library is so important to our community. We need libraries. We need books. We need everything that it can to enhance our community. Without our libraries, we're nothing. So I'm in favor of anything library. And the more you beautify the library, encourage more people to come to the library, the better the community will be. When you renovated the insides a few years back, if you remember that, it was, but when you renovated it, it was welcoming. You put the children's room in there and downstairs, and all the rooms that's downstairs was great. You just need to do the outside now. And we just need to finish it off.
Yeah.
Director McCormick, would you like to comment on the inside as well?
So, yes, we're not getting rid of our libraries, and we're not, we're just not going to do that. Libraries important, and we need them.
Great.
Thank you for everything.
Thank
Yay
you.
for libraries.
Thank you.
Alderman Kelly, I see your hand, but I feel like Director McCormick could respond. Any responses? Okay, Alderman Kelly then.
Thank you. So I just wanted to echo a lot of the sentiments here. I wanted to thank you for your perseverance on this. I know, COVID was unexpected for everybody, and we had big plans, and you guys really took ownership in terms of finding alternate funding and adjusting how we were going to go about this. So as someone whose business was literally right there, and I saw it for the past almost 10 years, every single day, it's definitely an underutilized part of our city. And I think that the improvements that you guys are working to create will make a huge difference. So I think the library, under your leadership and through the last few years especially, has become this symbol for community. There are books there, but we also come there for festivals, so we also come there for seeds and community meetings. So this will only allow us to have a more broader sense of community and a place for everybody to be able to come and enjoy. So I am fully behind this, and I'm very excited to see it come to fruition.
Thank you.
All right. Any more comments from the committee? Seeing none. Communications.
from Manager Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager, in regards to FY 2024 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan Substantial Amendment. I'm sorry, I'm not at the right spot here, I apologize. Here we go. And from Manager Julian Long, Urban Program Manager, Urban Program Department Updates, July 2023.
There being no objection, I will accept the communications and place them on file. Unfinished business?
None?
New business?
R23-139, relative to the acceptance of up to $200,000 from the New Hampshire Department of Safety Homeland Security Grant Program. Mr. Chairman, I motion and recommend approval, I guess, right?
Yep, to recommend final passage.
Recommend final passage.
And as a note, we do have a member who's on Zoom, so we would do a roll call vote for these. We've had also substantial discussion, so as long as there isn't any further comment, I'll just move to the vote. All those in favor?
No, we can't do it. Yeah, I'll call the vote. Alderwoman at Large, Shoshana Kelly.
Yes.
Alderman Patricia Klee, I say yes. Alderman at Large, Gloria Timmons.
I say yes.
Alderman Thomas Lopez, Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, you have 4 yeas and 0 nays.
Motion passes.
Okay. R23-140. Relative to acceptance and appropriation of $3 million from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development Community Planning Grant Program for the reconstruction of the Nashua Library Plaza area. By roll call.
If the clerk will
Right,
call the
sorry.
roll.
I make the motion to recommend final passage.
Okay, the motion is to recommend final passage. If the clerk will please call the roll.
Alderwoman Shoshana Kelly.
Enthusiastically, yes.
Alderman Patricia Klee, I echo that enthusiasm, yes. Alderwoman at Large Gloria Timmons.
Yes.
And Chairman Alderman Thomas Lopez.
I vote the standard yay.
Okay, that's 4 yeas and 0 nays. And okay. R23-141, amending the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Annual Action Plan for fiscal year 2024 relative to the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG. Mr. Chairman, I motion for final passage. Recommend final passage.
All right. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Okay. No comments, okay. Sorry, Alderwoman at Large, Shoshana Kelly.
Yes.
Alderman Patricia Klee says yes. Alderman at Large, Gloria Timmons.
Yes.
And Chairman Alderman Thomas Lopez.
Yes.
You have 4 yeas and 0 nays. That motion carries.
Madam Clerk, any new business ordinances?
None.
Table in committee?
None.
General discussion?
None. Are we missing something?
Not that I see.
We have, yeah.
I believe Ms. Jones here for your first grant you voted on.
Oh, okay.
Only if you had questions.
No, we've already voted on it, so I just wanted to make sure, yeah. No, I was like, am I missing something here? Sorry about that. Sorry. New business was none, and table and committee is none.
Okay, no general discussion? Public comment. You did come. Would you like to make public comment tonight? Some such.
Well enough alone.
He was so patient.
All right, seeing none, remarks by the alderman.
Just a quick one.
Alderman Klee.
Once again, I just want to extend thank yous to everyone who works so hard. And I want to really give kudos to our chairman. Bringing all these departments has been wonderful. I've been on the Human Affairs Committee, and everybody's done a great job, but you're bringing these departments in to help explain things to us as well as the public. And I truly appreciate that. So thank you so much for your doing. And I did want to add one thing to Manager Long. You kind of got thrown in this just as the last CDBG grants were coming, and you kind of put on the hot seat. So I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing. You're doing a great job. Thank you. and for Mr. Cooley, who sat through this so patiently. Appreciate you coming, thank you.
Alderman Timmons, anything?
No, I said enough.
Okay, well, my comments are, first to let everybody know, September 12th at the library, we will be having Employment Connect. And it's in its 16th year. Like, I didn't realize I've been chairing it for that long. It's crazy. It's a job fair event that's meant to highlight in-person interaction. So employers who are looking for talented employees that are looking for great placements. This is an opportunity to kind of get around the giant survey that every business has, and to kind of show your skills and ask the questions that the computer may not think to ask. So Employment Connect, September 12th. Leading up to that, if you're looking downtown at all, you're seeing a whole bunch of bins that are out that have a slogan called First Impressions. We're doing a job development program as well to help people get ready to make their first impressions. So we're collecting new and gently used professional business clothing, like polo shirts, button-down shirts, blouses, skirts, belts, that kind of stuff. There's a bin right over here at the mayor's office if my fellow alderman would like to drop some items in there. They are definitely appreciated and very effective for people who are walking into a job fair not feeling 100% and then getting those last couple of things and the personal touch that really makes them feel confident to get their new opportunities. And then finally, I just want to advise the public that in 2 weeks, you're going to see a removal of the extended outdoor dining and paving begin on Main Street. So be cautious and mindful of how you're going to plan your routes. That work is definitely long overdue. And we're looking forward to having a Main Street that's nice and smooth, maybe some railroad tracks that are fixed as well. But everything takes work, so there's going to be a process of adjustment. And then finally, I would like to thank Alderman Klee, our clerk, for showing up tonight, because without her, we wouldn't have had quorum. She literally just had a root canal. So, I mean, when we talk about dedication to the job, she's knocking it out of the park.
And the back to school.
Oh, and the back to school will be next Thursday, I believe?
This Thursday.
This Thursday.
This Thursday.
4 to 6:30?
Yep,
Fine.
this Thursday.
5:30. Let me
Let's get a
look
consensus
on my
here.
calendar.
All right, back to school, check out the library, they have the advertisements. Also, Nashua Soup Kitchen's Backpack Drive is beginning, so check with them if you are a Nashua Soup Kitchen client. All right.
I have 5 to 6:30. Nashua goes back to school.
Okay. Director McCormick, is she out there?
She's gone.
Dang it, okay. Well,
I do think it's 5 to 6:30, I'm not sure.
It's 5.
Yeah, 5 to 6:30, I think, yeah.
6:30.
all right, consensus is 5 p.m., but don't trust us, go check the library.
Don't trust us. I do my
It's an
spreads on the
opportunity to
calendar.
sign up for things at the library and learn more.
I like it, don't trust us.
It's my LeVar Burton homage. Can I get a motion?
5 to 6:30.
I'd like to
Okay.
move to adjourn by roll call.
Thank you, Alderman Kelly. The motion is to adjourn.
Let me grab our names here. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
Yes.
Alderman Patricia Klee says yes. Alderwoman at Large Gloria Timmons.
Yes.
And Chairman Alderman Thomas Lopez.
Yes,
We have 4 yeas. I'm surprised we didn't have a nay.
we are adjourned at 9:24.
Okay.